Hi, this is Zibby Owens, and you're listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. In my daily show, I interview today's latest best-selling, buzziest, or underrated authors and story creators whose work I think is worth your time. As a bookstore owner, publisher, author, and obviously podcaster, I get a comprehensive look at everything that's coming out and spend my time curating the best books so you don't have to. Stay in the know, get insider insights, and connect with guests like I do every single day. For more information, go to zibbymedia.com and follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens. Joanne Harris is the author of VIANNE, a novel. Joanne is the internationally best-selling author of over 20 novels, including CHOCOLAT, which became a movie in 2000 and was nominated for 5 Oscars and 7 BAFTAs. Her work spans a variety of genres, from magical realism to psychological thriller, and has won a series of literary awards. She has judged numerous literary prizes, including the Women's Prize, the Whitbread Prize, and the Royal Society Winton Prize for science books. She was the chair of the Society of Authors for 6 years and remains active on issues of authors' rights, the use of AI, and copyright. She lives in a little wood in Yorkshire, England, with her husband, and still performs with the band she first formed when she was 16. Welcome, Joanne. Thank you so much for coming on Totally Booked to discuss VIANNE. VIANNE? How should we pronounce it? VIANNE?
In French, it's VIANNE, but
yes, okay.
You can pronounce it any way you like.
Okay, VIANNE. Thank you so much. I loved Chocolat when it came out. I read it then. Was so excited that you had a new book, and then I devoured this book start to finish. Absolutely loved. Why don't you tell listeners a little bit about VIANNE, but also if they didn't read Chocolat, how this all connects, if you don't mind.
Well, absolutely. Well, this is in many ways the book to start with if you're new to VIANNE Rocher and her story, because it precedes Chocolat by 6 years, and it is VIANNE's origin story. Now, she and I have traveled together around the world for 26 years now. And so we have grown together. We've seen our children grow, and we've both reached the age where it's actually quite important to look back before moving forwards. And so I wrote this as a prequel to Chocolat. In this, VIANNE has not yet learnt to become VIANNE. She has just lost her mother. She's moved to Marseille on the coast of France from New York. She is in the very early stages of a pregnancy that she didn't plan. She's completely alone. She's homeless. She has no money. She isn't even called VIANNE at this point. She is about to discover who she is and where she's going. And because she's alone for the first time in her life, having traveled with her mother for 21 years, she has choices, but all of them come with a price.
Beautiful. You write so beautifully about grief, about losing her mom, but also there are so many other forms of grief. Louise, whose path she crosses very early on and who kindly offers her a room when he sees her in the state you described, has lost his wife. And you write, can I just read this little line? Is that okay?
Of course.
You say, grief is love with nowhere to go. That's what my mother used to say. And there is love inside him. It's like a seam of something bright between 2 layers of bitter rock. But he has learned to live with his grief. At least it is familiar. Love, on the other hand, is not. Love and its dangerous sibling, hope. Beautiful. Speak to me a little bit about grief, about how you're able to tap into this grief, how you write about it so eloquently, and what you want readers to take away from their experiences with loss.
I think everybody who lives to a certain age is going to discover grief at some point, grief and loss. In my case, I lost my father the year I was writing VIANNE, and I tapped into that to a certain degree, but I also wanted VIANNE to be a character who sees the damage in people, who sees their sadness, because she has her own burden of damage and sadness. And she gravitates to a man called Louis, who is the owner of a bistrot in Marseille's Old Quarter. And he is not a particularly prepossessing person to start off with. He's rude, he's grumpy, he's cross. He doesn't really want to give her a job, but he does because she sort of charms him into it. But she realizes that he has lost his wife 20 years ago. He is still working through the grief of losing her and also the guilt of living without her. And he keeps her memory alive through her recipe books, which are also full of her observations on life. And she becomes one of the voices that VIANNE's hearing that help her take her path through life and make the choices she needs to choose to become the kind of mother she wants to be.
Well, the way you described how she conjures her spirit, Luis's wife, and all of her recipes and the soulful little notes that she writes in the margins, and how she literally feels her soul sort of around her like like a thin blanket or something. You wrote it so much more eloquently than that, but she brings her back to life through her food and her cooking and the smells and senses. Talk about that a little bit and where that comes from.
Well, I think some of this book comes from the idea that memory at least helps to bring the dead to life in one way or the other. Louis is treasuring the memory of his wife through her cooking, and he is cooking her recipes just as he did without changing a thing, because he doesn't even want to change what's in her kitchen, which is quite scruffy and unkempt, because he's afraid of cleaning the dust of her away, the memory of her away. VIANNE, of course, is trying to escape the memory of her mother, and her mother's voice also talks to her, telling her that she has to move on, that she has to beware of getting attached to people, because if she gets attached to people, to place, she is going to lose her freedom. So I wanted these two women's voices in VIANNE's mind to be both of them very strong, powerful voices directing her down two different option paths. And both through memory. Both of them live through memory and through the things that they've left in the world. In Margot's case, her cookery book, but also the secret that Louis is carrying through VIANNE's mother, the secret of who VIANNE is, which is something that at the beginning of the book, VIANNE doesn't really know.
Yes, lots of secrets that get revealed in this book, which we will not talk about, but all of which surprised me and made the book even richer by the end of it. When you write about her making friends, like VIANNE makes friends with these two young guys who are starting this sort of radical new chocolate store that at the time is something that was not done in sort of a back alley of an old herbalist's place. And they teach her, and you teach us, how to make chocolate and how to take the cocoa beans and how you process them. And then not only do we learn the ins and outs of that through fiction, but then we see the magic of how chocolate really helps the people who come to the inn, and the grumpy old man Emile who sits at the bar, and all the other cast of characters as she sprinkles it in or gives them chocolat chaud in the morning or any of that. Talk a little bit about that piece of the story, sculpting those men's story, which again evolved in such an interesting way throughout the book, and chocolate itself.
Well, when VIANNE arrives in this community, she doesn't know anybody at all, but she knows that she needs money, she needs a job. And so she finds a community in the old quarter of Marseille, which is a community of grumpy old men centered around Louis Martin, who is also a grumpy old man, and his rather run-down cafe. And because she has an ability to see into people and to understand what it is that they need and to understand their grief, she manages to charm her way into the lives of these people to a certain extent. She is not accepted at first. She is an outsider. She is possibly ethnically different. Nobody quite knows where she's from, including VIANNE herself, but she's very good at making connections and finding the things that bring them together. And in the case of the men at this cafe who come for their lunch every day, it's food, it's cooking. And she manages to learn Margot's recipes and to adapt them slightly to make them her own. And from this, she establishes the most elementary connection there is, because food is possibly the simplest way of connecting with somebody and expressing feelings towards them. And from that, she gains an inroad into the community and some form of acceptance. But she is also making friends with, as you said, these two young men in a back alley, Guy Lacarrière and his partner Mamed, who are trying, against all odds, and with great financial burden, to create a boutique chocolate shop in the old quarter of Marseille, where nobody's that interested in chocolate and nobody really sees why they need that kind of thing. But their passion for chocolate, for its history, its folklore, the transformative aspect of chocolate from bean to bar, which they are trying to control, this is something that pulls VIANNE in. And although she's never actually eaten chocolate, not of that sort, and she doesn't really like it when she first tries it, she does understand their enthusiasm and their passion and the transformative nature of what they're working with.
The way you write about chocolate in the US. I think you called it, I don't know, sweaty or oily or something that made me think, oh my gosh, like as I unwrapped the Hershey bar for a s'more or something, how imitation chocolate this really is. And of course, I love like a good dark chocolate bar, but the vast difference between the two and how chocolate has become repackaged, repurposed, filled with artificial stuff, as we do in the United States with everything, is quite the contrast. So I appreciated that little saying in there.
I think we do that everywhere because chocolate has been so very successful globally. It has been globalized and homogenized and has mostly palm oil in it now, and has very much lost contact with what it used to be, with this special, strange, bitter substance that was valued not just for its effect on the body, but also for its spiritual side too. And I wanted to get back to that, some of the story and the folklore of chocolate and the mythology and the endless history of chocolate, to try to get to the bottom of why chocolate is different from anything else that you can eat.
And where did your fascination with chocolate begin?
Well, I've always been interested in folklore and myth, and what people believe and have believed over the centuries. And chocolate just has this vast folklore attached to it and this incredible history. And it has been incredibly popular. It started in Europe as a very niche substance, something that was thought of as a kind of bizarre tribal concoction. And it gained traction and became a massive industry. And it's now, it's one of the driving industries in the world. It's everywhere. It's in every country. It has had phenomenal success. And it has still polarized people. People still, are divided into people who accept chocolate and people who, for some reason, think that it will do terrible things to their bodies if they have even the tiniest bit of it. This idea that it has always divided people and made them feel that it had perhaps more power over them than it should.
Yeah, the ultimate drug here.
Absolutely.
One of the first drugs. You highlight a few words that have similar sounds, but different spellings to contrast various things. For example, roots and roots are OOTS and ROUTES, which I found particularly interesting because
that's cause hell with my translators, I know, but
but it's true because putting down roots and the roots that you take in life seem completely opposite and yet sound so similar. Tell me a little bit about that and where VIANNE sort of comes, she wrestles with this the whole book.
Yes, and she's going to continue wrestling with it throughout the other 4 books, in fact, because she is divided between her mother's policy, which has always been to deny putting down roots, to deny connections with people. She's even denied giving VIANNE the kind of toys that she can take with him on their journeys, because the idea that VIANNE could become too attached to something has always been anathema to her. And so the idea that they have to be free from attachment and from place has always been very important to VIANNE's mother. But now VIANNE is going to be a mother. She is trying to go a different way for her own child. And so the idea that from a journey to a making of a home, that one route can become another. And she's hoping that her daughter will grow to have friends and toys and a home, and that she will be able to have a kitchen with her own things in it, and all the things that she's never had. She doesn't quite know how to do this, and her mother's voice is still very strong in her mind, telling her that that is terribly dangerous and that there is something pursuing her, and if she stops, it will catch up with them.
And this notion of the man in the black coat, or what is that? What is that for you? Is that death? Is it bad luck? What does that represent?
I think it represents a lot of things. To VIANNE's mother, it is the reason she can't stop. And there is a secret, of course, because everybody has a secret in this book that she is carrying, which I won't reveal at this point, but we do find out what it is at the end. But I think it's also a manifestation of all the things that VIANNE's mother fears. Being found out, being discovered, losing her daughter, having to stay in one place when she doesn't want to, losing the freedom that she's had and the life that she's made. All of this is summarized by the man in black, who might also be a figure of authority, the church, a father figure. And he changes aspect as we go through the story, because he's not just one thing, he's many.
And back to the food just for a minute, and your history in general as a writer. How did you become an author yourself, and how did you learn to write about food and meals and cooking in such an eloquent, captivating way?
I didn't learn. I'm completely self-taught. I read a lot as a child. I wrote a lot of stories as a child. I fell into becoming published as a sort of experiment. I wasn't expecting to give up my day job as a teacher to write full time because I was told that the kind of things I was writing were not commercial, were not fashionable, were not easily quantifiable in literary terms. But I was having fun, and I've always just written what I wanted to write. And in the case of Chocolat, I think there was a pivotal point there because Chocolat was my third book. I'd written two other books that were not quite in my voice. I was having difficulty understanding what my voice was. And I was very good at doing other people's voices, but I hadn't really come to my own. And then I had my daughter and I wrote Chocolat. And that was the story of a woman with a young daughter. And I realized that was my voice. And so I took into that story a lot of stuff about my French heritage, the things that I remember from my French family, a lot of stuff about motherhood. And I thought, okay, this is what I sound like. And from then on, all my books were very much centered around those things. And because I've always thought that books should be as immersive as possible and would involve ideally as many senses as possible, I started to include scent and taste primarily, partly because I have synesthesia and I smell colors. And so, this is my primary access to the world, but also because I wanted it to be an immersive experience for the reader. And so I think inevitably a lot of scents and tastes found their way into the stories that way.
Can you explain synesthesia for people who are not as familiar with it?
This is a form of neurodiversity whereby two senses, and they can be any senses, are emerged in a sort of way. So, sometimes a color can ping a sound, or sometimes, in my case, a color pings a scent. So I would be very happy in your library there because all your books are all different colors. I would have a great time working out what they all smell of.
When did you realize you had that?
Um, I only realized that not everybody else had that when I was in my 30s. It wasn't a topic that people discussed. And, I just took it for granted that everybody smelled colors. But I've talked to so many other synesthetes who have said the same thing, who have said that it took them, in some cases, decades to understand that not everybody processed the world in the way that they did. Because actually, I think we just assume that we are entirely normal and that everybody else is exactly like us. And of course, the more we realize about neurodiversity, the more we realize that that's quite untrue. And very likely, we all have idiosyncratic ways of processing reality.
Very true. Wow. Well, what a gift to put it all into fiction so the rest of us can benefit from the senses that you evoke. Where do you see your writing going after this book?
Well, I've written 20 odd books now, and I have never quite known where it was going. I've always written the book that needed to be written at the time.
Mhm.
And so, writing and publishing being what it is, I've already finished my next book, which I've just finished editing this week,
Oh,
which is very different from VIANNE, which is a kind of supernatural folk horror set on the Yorkshire moors. But I have written now 5 books about VIANNE. She keeps coming back. I think we've grown alike with age, although we were very unlike when I started writing Chocolat. And I think it's not unlikely that she will come back at some point with a story, or one of her daughters will come back with a story, and I will write about her again.
amazing. What advice would you have for aspiring authors?
Well, for a start, ditch the word aspiring because it's unhelpful and it makes a kind of us and them division between people who are published and people who are not published, or people who want to be published. I think anyone who wants to write, should give themselves permission to write and to find it as important as they want to find it. Not everybody needs to be a professional to enjoy writing and to get joy from writing. And I think joy is really at the heart of this. Just do it, love it, and hope that somebody else loves it too.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I am reading a collection of short stories by Sunny Singh, who has been collecting these for quite a long time, who is writing about war and the victims of war in one way or another. It's very interesting, very well written, very beautiful.
And what about your cooking pursuits? Are you as good a cook a chef? Do you make dinners like this every night? Is this what your kitchen
Absolutely
looks
not.
like?
No. I absolutely don't. No, I don't spend a lot of time in the kitchen. I do enjoy cooking. I think it's therapeutic, but I don't do it every day. I'm very good at assembling things. At the moment, I'm mostly assembling things because I've got so little time to do any cooking that I might cook a meal at the weekend. The rest of the time, if it takes longer than 30 minutes to make it, I am not interested in making it right now.
Well, I was feeling ashamed at my lack of cooking prowess as I read this book, and I'm like, she must cook, and she writes so much, and oh my gosh, this is amazing. So anyway, glad to know that. Selfishly.
I think VIANNE's a lot better at cooking than I am.
Okay.
I think she's much better at following a recipe too. I'm incapable of following a recipe.
Well, it would be really neat to go to Bon Mère. That's the name of the name of the cafe. I would love to see a pop-up of that on your tour. Like maybe, I don't know if you have any plans of that, but I would love to just go in and get a little meal and maybe try the bouillabaisse.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice?
It would be
Well, I shall suggest it. I'm coming to the Boston Lit Fest in October, so maybe somebody can do something there.
that would be
Otherwise, I shall have my bottle of scent that I made to accompany this book, and I shall be spritzing books and people if they want to be spritzed, and they will get the scent illustration of VIANNE, which is what I've been working on alongside writing the book, and which I think gives an extra little dimension to the story.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the joy you gave me in reading the book and all the different paths it took me down and sort of the mystical element that makes you just sit back in your chair a little bit and wonder. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I do appreciate that.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to Totally Booked with Zibby, formerly Moms Don't Have Time to Read Books. If you loved the show, tell a friend, leave a review, follow me on Instagram at Zibby Owens, and spread the word. Thanks so much. Oh, and buy the books.